Questions without notice. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's long-awaited announcement to launch the booking system for COVID vaccinations was executed with precision in every newspaper and media outlet this morning. But there are already widespread reports of the system failing. If the government can get the media strategy right, why can't it get the vaccine delivery right?
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'll ask the Minister for Health to make further comments. As I said in this place yesterday, Mr Speaker, that characterisation of that question in that way has only one purpose, and that is to seek to undermine the vaccination program in this country. The issues put forward by the Shadow Minister are false, Mr Speaker. They're disingenuous, and they seek to undermine one of the most important vaccination programs this country has ever undertaken for the good health and the recovery of this country. I would urge
members
the opposition,
on both sides,
Mr Speaker, to engage in this national project of such greater importance to this country rather than continuing to stoop into the partisanship of playing politics with the COVID pandemic. I'll ask the Minister for Health to add to my answer.
Members on my left, the Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And to add to the Prime Minister's answer, the correct position is that there are now over 200,000 or 203,000 vaccinations that have been administered. That was more than a 10% increase in national vaccinations alone only yesterday. There are now 509 aged care facilities and over 45,500 aged care vaccinations which have been implemented. In particular, the vaccination program began, as we said it would, in late February, on the 22nd of February, for Phase 1A. The AstraZeneca program began, as we said it would, in early March. And then next week, again, as we said it would, the expansion to Phase 1B will commence on the 22nd of March, 4 weeks after Phase 1A commenced. And we'll be able to do that because we have the sovereign vaccine manufacturing capability in Australia. In particular, 1,169 general practices have been announced today, with more to come on board over the coming days. They will commence at different times during the course of next week. All are available to commence next week. All have applied, been accepted and have placed orders. Very importantly, there are 6 million Australians who will be in Phase 1B. Not all will be done in week 1 or week 2, but over the course of the coming months. And that's a very important thing to understand, to make sure that we have a vaccine rollout which uses the general practice network, that over 1,000 general practices will grow over the coming weeks to over 4,000 general practices. And what does that mean? It means every Australian who seeks to be vaccinated will be vaccinated.
Just before I call the next question, I'd like to inform the House that we have present in the gallery this afternoon the Honourable Bronwyn Bishop, a former Senator, former Member, former Minister and former Speaker of the House. On behalf of the House, a warm welcome to you. We also have present in the gallery this afternoon the Honourable Peter Garrett, former Member, former Minister for the Environment, Heritage and the Arts, and on behalf of the House, a warm welcome to you too. And I'd also like to inform the House we have present in the gallery this afternoon the Honourable Michael Atkinson, former Speaker of the Tasmanian House of Assembly, and again on behalf of the House, South Australia, on behalf of the House, a very warm welcome to you. And I call the member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please inform the House how the Morrison government is stepping up to manage a concerning spike in COVID-19 cases in Papua New Guinea to save lives and to support our closest Pacific neighbours, the health system, and how these activities will help to protect Australians, particularly Australians in Queensland, as far north Queensland as, of course, in the Torres Strait. Thank you very much indeed.
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, there are many friends of Papua New Guinea in this place on all sides of the chamber. but none greater than the member for Leichhardt, Mr. Speaker. He has done an outstanding job in responding to this latest crisis in Papua New Guinea. I want to thank him on behalf of the Foreign Minister and the Minister for Health and many other members of the National Security Committee for the tremendous input he has given to framing the response that I announced earlier today in relation to the COVID crisis in Papua New Guinea. There are so many great friends of Papua New Guinea because there is no closer member of our Pacific family than Papua New Guinea. Earlier this week, we mourned together with Papua New Guinea about the loss of their Grand Chief, Sir Michael Samare. And this is a nation, this is a people, more importantly, because even when at the time it was an Australian territory, the people of Papua New Guinea stood by Australians like no other nation we can think of in our region, Mr. Speaker. They were there for us on the Kokoda Trail, and we will be there for them, Mr. Speaker, as they face this most recent challenge. And, Mr. Speaker, today we have announced that in response to the serious escalation of the COVID crisis in Papua New Guinea, Mr. Speaker, that has seen the WHO now categorise outbreaks in Port Moresby and West Sepik as large-scale community transmission events, Mr. Speaker. We are moving immediately to get 8,000 doses of our vaccines from domestic stocks here in Australia to vaccinate frontline health workers in PNG from next week. That will be supported, Mr. Speaker, by deploying a strategic AUSMAT team who will be there on Monday, Mr. Speaker, to commence the planning of further responses by Australia, which will include further clinical teams that will support that vaccination program and other urgent health tasks. We will be seeking the release of 1 million of the doses that we have contracted from AstraZeneca from the European production facilities, and we want them to release those stocks of vaccines, Mr. Speaker, so we can support one of the most devastated developed countries as a result of COVID right now. We need that help right now, Mr. Speaker, and I have no doubt the Parliament from all sides will be joining us in that call to our European friends to release those vaccines to ensure that we can support our family here in the Pacific. In addition, in response to the request from Prime Minister Marape, who I've been in constant contact with, we're deploying some 1 million surgical masks, 200,000 P2N95 respirator masks, 100,000 sets of gowns, goggles, gloves and hand sanitizer, 20,000 face shields and up to 200 non-invasive ventilators. This is part of a comprehensive Australian response, including support for surveillance testing, PPE and clinical care capacity, reopening the Rita Flynn testing and isolation facility in Port Moresby, a new emergency triage facility at Port Moresby General Hospital, Mr. Speaker, and the PNG COVID-19 National Control Centre and Health Authority.
I call the member for Cooper.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the 7th of January, the Prime Minister said about the vaccine rollout, and I quote, "We have set out cautious timetables and we don't want to make promises that we can't keep. That is incredibly important." Why then has the Prime Minister failed to deliver on his announcement of 4 million vaccinations by the end of March?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, there have been many COVID tests that Australians have undertaken over the course of this pandemic. But there is a test for the opposition when it comes to national unity on the delivery of the vaccine program, Mr. Speaker.
Members on my left.
The Labor Party in this chamber is failing the test of national unity, Mr. Speaker, to support the national vaccination program. Mr. Speaker, as we have learnt, as the government that has led Australians out of the COVID-19 crisis, Mr. Speaker, both the pandemic and the economic recession that it caused, Mr. Speaker, to put Australians in the forefront of the world as we emerge, Mr. Speaker. As there is chaos and crisis around the world, in Europe, in the United States, Mr. Speaker, in the United Kingdom, all around the world, here in Australia, we have proved to be a safe haven for Australians in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic storm. And, Mr. Speaker, as we have learned, as we've led the country in that way, that it is important to continue to respond to events as they occur. Now, it may be lost on the Labor Party, but when you order 3.8 million, Mr. Speaker, vaccines from Europe, and 700,000 are able to be delivered because of the crisis in Europe, This is something that the Labor Party seems to overlook. What they also fail to overlook, Mr Speaker, is it was this government in August of last year that knew that supply chain vulnerabilities would be present. So we put in place, in August of last year, the commencement of a program to create a domestic manufacturing capability for the AstraZeneca vaccine. Were it not for that, Mr Speaker, were it not for that strategic decision, just like our decision to close the borders at the outset of the program, Mr Speaker, and to call a global pandemic 2 weeks before the World Health Organisation, Mr Speaker, were it not for that, Australia would not have a vaccination program, were it not for the foresight of the Minister for Health and Aged Care and, Mr Speaker, the Secretary of the Department of Health, Professor Brendan Murphy, the Chief Medical Officer, Mr Speaker, Professor Kelly, who those opposite now seek to undermine, Mr Speaker, in seeking to undercut and undermine confidence in the national vaccination program, Mr Speaker. This is a leader of the opposition who only has political bones in his body, Mr Speaker. You won't find any other bones, Mr Speaker, and you certainly won't find a spine.
Before I call on the next question, quite obviously the level of interjections is far too high. I wasn't going to keep sitting the Prime Minister down to make the obvious point, but I'll now make another obvious point. I'm issuing a general warning. Anyone who doesn't understand what that means, you can consult the practice. That means 94A does not require a warning, but a general warning means you can be named. I call the member for Herbert.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is providing critical medical support to our neighbours in PNG, including through the rollout of life-saving COVID-19 vaccines?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Herbert for his deep engagement with and concern for the people of Papua New Guinea. The World Health Organisation has identified that PNG is facing large-scale community transmission. We know that there are 19 of 22 provinces that are facing some form of outbreak that has been identified so far. We also know that Port Moresby Hospital, as one example, is dealing with great pressure on the number of beds, with over 90% of beds occupied, and we are seeing an increase in the number of lives lost. So in that context, Australia has stepped in a number of ways. Firstly, of course, we've already provided $60 million to assist them, but there's $144 million directly for vaccine support, a critical step forward. Secondly, however, we are providing vaccines. As the Prime Minister said, to assist with their frontline health workers, we'll immediately make 8,000 vaccines available, and this is after discussions with the Papua New Guinean government, and that they will be distributed shortly with appropriate consumables, those items that can assist in the administration of the vaccines. We have sought and will be seeking 1 million vaccines of Australia's contingent, which has been held by the European Union, as the Prime Minister has just said, to be released, to be made available for the urgent life-saving need in Papua New Guinea. And we hope that that is accepted as a critical global responsibility to make sure that those vaccines which have been held back, 3.1 million of 3.8 million, are allowed out for this fundamental humanitarian task. In addition to that, we have also made available a medical assistance package, beginning with AUSMAT, and there's an AUSMAT forward assessment team which is due to be on the ground during the course of next week in Papua New Guinea, which will assess needs and assist with the program. But as part of that, we are providing critical medical assistance. 1 million surgical masks, 200,000 N95 masks, 100,000 gloves, 100,000 gowns, 100,000 pairs of goggles. As well as that, 20,000 face shields, 100,000 units of hand sanitizer, and very importantly, 200 non-invasive ventilators, and given that the nature of them and the fact that we'll be able to provide that assistance by Australian medical authorities working in a remote way with people across PNG, these may well prove to be life-saving, absolutely fundamental humanitarian forms of medical aid. So I want to thank the member for Herbert and thank the member for Leichhardt for being such advocates. Our job is to put out the hand of friendship to those who have given it to us over so much.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said economic confidence will be reinforced by the rollout of the vaccination program. What will be the economic confidence and jobs impact of ripping away JobKeeper while the vaccine rollout falls behind schedule? Why is the Prime Minister so quick to rip away JobKeeper but so slow to roll out the vaccines?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I'm reminded by the Treasurer that 18,000 people in the member's electorate have already graduated from JobKeeper, Mr Speaker. Graduated from JobKeeper. Those
members on my left
jeer and sneer at that comment, Mr Speaker, but I tell you, for those individuals, those 18,000 people who live in the member for Corao's electorate, that is a significant development in their lives, that they are no longer having to depend on taxpayer-funded income support, and that the businesses they work for, Mr Speaker, are getting back on their feet. And you know, Mr Speaker, the Australian economy is getting back on its feet, Mr Speaker. It is recovering. The comeback has been on for some time now, Mr Speaker, and that is enabling Australia to move away from the emergency supports that were so necessary at a time of crisis, delivered in record time and with record efficiency, Mr Speaker, as a partnership, not just from the government, but working with the business community and the financial community to ensure that we could preserve the lifeline of income, Mr Speaker, and to preserve the lives of Australians who are facing the most incredible uncertainty that they are likely to have faced in their lives over that period of time, Mr Speaker. So that has been a very necessary program. But we said very clearly that that program would have to withdraw when the economy was returning, and that is what we're seeing, Mr Speaker. The vaccination program is rolling out, Mr Speaker. Over 200,000 Australians already vaccinated, 1,000 doctors signing up, Mr Speaker, and that will grow to over 4,000, Mr Speaker. We will move to when the AstraZeneca vaccine in a few weeks' time, Mr Speaker, will move to the production and rollouts of 1 million vaccines every week. This is because of the sovereign decisions taken by our government to ensure we had the domestic capability to deliver on that need. Mr Speaker, the confidence is growing. The economy is coming back, Mr Speaker, and Australians are getting up on their feet again, Mr Speaker. And the last thing they need, Mr Speaker, is a negative Labor leader and Labor Party, Mr Speaker, who wants to pull the rug from under them by seeking to undermine the most important vaccination program that this country has ever seen.
The Leader of the Greens.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister regarding the alleged rapist of Brittany Higgins. Almost 4 weeks ago, I asked you, amongst other things, whether the alleged rapist of Ms Higgins had meetings with ministers, their staff or departmental officials at any time since the alleged rape occurred. You undertook to the House to make inquiries and report back. Given there's been 23 days to make such inquiries, can you please now advise whether the alleged rapist met with your ministers or their staff after the alleged rape?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, you'll recall, Mr Speaker, and the member for Melbourne will recall, that I reported back to the House very soon after that matter, when I reported on the inquiries that we made, particularly through the presiding officers, to understand about the issues that were raised in the question. In terms of the broader actions of the ministry, Mr Speaker, there is an incredible array of activity that goes on across the government, and the sheer scale of what the member is asking, Mr Speaker, is not something that we can give it a definitive response to. We have looked into this matter, Mr Speaker, and I have no information to suggest that what the member suggests is true.
The member for Dawson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on enhanced border measures the Morrison government is implementing in response to the unfolding COVID-19 situation in Papua New Guinea?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. I was up in Mackay last week. They love George Christensen in Mackay, I've got to say, Mr Speaker. A great advocate for his local community and for North Queensland as well. Mr Speaker, the government obviously has made announcements today in relation to our response to provide support to our friends and to our family in Papua New Guinea. And at the same time, Mr Speaker, we've taken actions to protect Australia from the vaccine spread, the potential spread of the vaccine across the Torres Strait. I can inform the House that in March of last year, we took a decision to stand up Operation Overarch, which was designed to protect the Torres Strait protected zone. And Mr Speaker, we had seen very early on in this pandemic, when we took a decision to look at the way in which this was unfolding, particularly in Asia and China at the time, that we would close our borders to the rest of the world. And Mr Speaker, that is a decision that we took that stood us in such good stead, and to this very day has been at the heart of our success in keeping this virus under control. So, Mr Speaker, we don't want the virus sneaking across what is obviously a very small area, and we don't want people in North Queensland, particularly Indigenous communities, facing the incursion of that disease. Mr Speaker, we have a remarkable effort underway, and as I say, it's been underway now for 12 months by the Australian Border Force personnel and by the Australian Defence Force personnel, working in concert with the Queensland Police and Queensland Health and other Commonwealth agencies to make sure that we do have an extra layer of protection across the Torres Strait. As all Australians know, it is a very, very narrow point. The Torres Strait only separates Cape York in far north Queensland from the PNG mainland by 150 kilometres. There are several hundred islands, in fact over 200 in the strait, 17 of which are inhibited. And Mr Speaker, we have the ability to provide support at that southern end of Papua New Guinea, and we do that on a regular basis. But Mr Speaker, we want to do that in a way that doesn't see the virus spread into Australia. So I want to commend the work of the ABF officers, commend the work of the Australian Defence Force officers and all of those who are involved in Operation Overarch. It is designed to keep Australians safe and healthy, which has been the want of this government from the first day of our response to this virus, and at the very same time we are providing additional support to our family and friends in Papua New Guinea, and will continue to do that.
The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. I refer to reports the Treasurer has told the government to be prepared for a rough couple of months because of the decision to rip away JobKeeper. Why is the government treating the people on JobKeeper about to lose their jobs as a political problem rather than a human one?
The Treasurer has the call.
Spare me the feigned indignation, Mr Speaker, from the member for Rankin. The reality is the JobKeeper payment was always meant to be a temporary one, Mr Speaker. Initially, it was planned for 6 months, and we extended it for 12 months, Mr Speaker. We extended it to 12 months, and at $90 billion, it's the single largest economic support program any Australian government has ever undertaken. And the reality is there's been 2.7 million Australians who have graduated from JobKeeper, including more than 20,200 from the member's electorate. But as JobKeeper ends, the Morrison government's support does not. The Morrison government's support continues, Mr Speaker, with the recent aviation and tourism package, Mr Speaker, designed to provide low-cost airfares and low-cost loans, Mr Speaker, like the Home Builder program, like, Mr Speaker, like the hiring credit, like the infrastructure programs that were brought forward, like the immediate expensing that has led to a boost in investment, like the apprenticeship announcement, Mr Speaker, which saw within 5 months 100,000 new apprentices, and like the tax cuts, Mr Speaker, because we on this side of the House believe that Australians should earn more and keep more of what they earn. The member for Rankin doesn't know much about tax cuts. He only knows about tax increases.
Member for Rankin.
The reality is we continue to provide the economic support across to the Australian community, and what we have seen is the labour market be remarkably resilient.
To say to the member for Lawler, she's continued to interject. Member for Mallee.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government's commitment to driving job and economic opportunities in regional areas will help underpin Australia's recovery from COVID-19?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We respectfully heard at the start of question time about a £10 POM who came to this nation and contributed so much to our country and to our parliament. And today we also pay respects to all those Irish immigrants who came to our country at St Patrick's Day, and I know the member for Cowper and probably even the member for Shortland will join in me, and probably others too, in saying Happy St Patrick's Day. Many of those Irish people, Mr Speaker, came to regional areas. They came and they forged an existence out of regional Australia because they knew that their future lay in those rural and regional areas, and good on them. They helped our nation to be the success it is today. And I thank the member for Mallee for her question and acknowledge her hard work and advocacy for her Victorian electorate, Mr Speaker. She has advocated so fiercely for the Murray Basin Freight Rail, and we contributed $200.2 million towards its success. That's on top of the $240 million that we'd put towards that project in the past. But more than that, she knows, as does every other regional member of this parliament, how magnificent country Australians have been through the COVID-19 crisis. They have been their best selves, even though decisions were taken in faraway capital cities to shut down areas, to wear face masks. Even farmers were going out in regional areas wearing face masks when they were feeding stock, even though they were many hundreds of kilometres away from the capital cities. But they've been their best selves and they've helped keep their regions largely COVID-free. And I say thank you to those regional Australians for doing what they've done for keeping COVID-19 away from those regional areas. And indeed, there are many, many jobs out in regional Australia right now. The Move to More campaign is going to ensure that regional Australia can be its best self. And this morning I was there with the CEO of the Regional Australia Institute, Liz Ritchie, to launch that wonderful campaign. And it is a wonderful campaign because we want many of those Sydney-siders, 7,782, can't be wrong, in the September quarter alone, moved to the regions, moved out of the capital cities into the regions. And indeed, it is great news, Prime Minister, and indeed many others are taking the transition, taking the tree change to move to a regional area because they know that during COVID you could have been at Manangatang, you could have been at Mangapla, you could have been at Moree, you could have been at Moranbah, and you could still tap in via telepresence to those Zoom meetings in a far-off capital city and get involved, participate and do all the sorts of things that capital city people have taken for granted. Regions, no better place in which to live, no better place in which to invest, play and work and do all the great things that is keeping our country great.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In response to the Prime Minister's decision to rip away JobKeeper, the operator of Gold Coast tourism business Duffy Down Under says, and I quote, "What is the point of bringing everyone safely across the desert just to drop us off a cliff?" He's right, isn't he? Why leave people behind when the crisis isn't over yet?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, and I'll ask the Minister for Tourism to add further to my answer. Mr Speaker, what the tourism industry needs is tourists. That's what they need, Mr Speaker. We want to see the demand come back into the tourism sector, Mr Speaker, and at like no other time in the tourism industry's history, Mr Speaker, have they ever seen a package of support, of some $1.2 billion, Mr Speaker. Never before has there been such a significant package of support that has been provided to the tourism and the travel sector, Mr Speaker, and the aviation sector.
Member
that
for
is
Rankin.
going to see Australians getting in the air and then getting on the ground, because $1 spent in the air, Mr Speaker, is worth $10 on the ground for those tourism and travel industries. So whether up in North Queensland, Mr Speaker, or other parts of the country that have been so devastated by the withdrawal of international tourists because the close of those international borders, Mr Speaker, so necessary to protect Australians' health and well-being through this COVID-19 pandemic, on top of the JobKeeper support, on top of the cash flow assistance, on top of all the other measures that we've put in place to get Australians through this COVID-19 pandemic, in particular the travel, tourism and aviation industry, then further support is being provided, Mr Speaker, and I will ask the Minister to add further to the answer.
The Minister for Tourism.
Thanks, PM, and thanks, Mr Speaker. And I was at the Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary with our 3 wonderful members from the Gold Coast on Friday. And can I tell the House that the reception there of our package on the Gold Coast was huge, absolutely huge. And, Mr Speaker, one of the other things that I can report is that following the announcement, the bookings that we have already seen on our major airlines has been quite extraordinary. In fact, they haven't seen booking levels like it since before the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr Speaker, what the tourism industry said to the government was, more than anything else, they want tourists. And what our $1.2 billion package was all about was making sure that we're putting confidence into the aviation sector, confidence into the tourism sector, so that people will get moving again, and they have voted with their feet. They're booking airline tickets like they haven't been booked in the last 12 months, and our discount tickets haven't even started. 46,000
The Minister will pause. Member for Lawler. Couldn't have been more clear last time. The Minister has the call.
And while you've got some spare time, book a ticket, take a trip, do your patriotic duty. 46,000 tickets available. 46,000 tickets available each week. Everyone,
the Minister's time has
duty.
concluded. The member for Bonner has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House how the Morrison government's economic support packages have helped save the Australian economy and enabled it to recover strongly from the COVID-19 recession? Is the Treasurer aware of any threats to our economic recovery?
The Treasurer has the call.
Speaker, and I thank the member for Bonner for his question, acknowledge his experience as a restaurateur, Mr Speaker, and as a small business person, something that those opposite have little experience of, Mr Speaker, little experience of. Now, the Australian economy is recovering from the most significant economic shock since the Great Depression, and it's recovering with the support of $251 billion of direct financial support from the Morrison government. The JobKeeper program, the JobSeeker program, the cash flow boost, the $750 payments to millions of pensioners, to carers, to veterans, to others on income support. That has helped see 94% of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero come back to work, Mr Speaker. That has seen household spending, Mr Speaker, household consumption go up. That has seen dwelling investment go up. That has seen business investment go up. And that has seen farm GDP grow, Mr Speaker. The net result has been in the December quarter we saw 3.1% growth. This is the first time since records began back in 1959 that Australia has enjoyed 2 consecutive quarters of economic growth of more than 3%, Mr Speaker. And we're also seeing business and consumer confidence come back to its pre-pandemic levels. And I had the opportunity to join the member for Bonner in his electorate recently at Gumdale, Mr Speaker, where we went to Wallam Nurseries and we met with Peter, who said that his business before JobKeeper came in was on the edge, and JobKeeper has seen him keep the 30 staff, and now, as a result of programs by this side of the House, he is now taking on new apprentices, Mr Speaker. And he's come off JobKeeper, and it's another success story across Queensland, Mr Speaker. Now, I'm asked, are there any threats? And the greatest threat comes from those opposite with their plans for higher taxes, Mr Speaker. $387 billion of higher taxes. Well, Mr Speaker, he says it's boring to talk about $387 billion, but that's not what the Australian people thought at the last election. Because when the member for McMahon said, if you don't like our policies, don't vote for us, they took him literally, Mr Speaker. They took him literally. And Labor's higher taxes on superannuation, on income, Mr Speaker, on small business, on retirees would have been destructive to the Australian economy. And just the other week, he was asked for an opportunity to support our legislated Stage 3 income tax cuts, and he refused to do so, saying we'll have to wait and see. And it's because those on the other side of the House don't believe in lower taxes. We on this side of the House absolutely do.
The member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given it's now been more than 48 hours since Brittany Higgins told the Women's March for Justice the Prime Minister's office had sought to undermine her loved ones, has the Prime Minister asked his staff if this is true? If not, why not?
The Prime Minister.
Speaker, I refer the member to the answer yesterday.
Members on my left, the member for Bass has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. Will the Minister please advise the House on the measures the Morrison government is taking to improve the health of Australian women, particularly those living in rural and regional Australia?
The Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Bass for her question? The health of women and girls in Australia is fundamental to us all, not just to the individuals themselves, but to their families, their communities and to the nation. The Morrison government recognises this, and the National Women's Health Strategy 2020 to 2030 was launched by the Minister for Health last year. The strategy identifies policy gaps and new and emerging health priorities for women and girls. It presents recommendations for action and highlights the need for collaboration between governments at all levels, the health sector, patient groups and the women themselves. Importantly, rural and regional women are identified as a priority population in this strategy. And this is because women in rural and remote areas have poorer health outcomes than those in the city. They have greater health risks and they find it more difficult to access health services. Sadly, we know too that the gap is even greater between Indigenous and non-Indigenous women, and we're working harder to close that gap. But we are committed to tackling the issue. Now, in the members' electorate on the ground, what that means is we're supporting mobile health hubs, something fought for by the member for Bass. That's doctors and specialists going out on wheels, travelling directly to patients with chronic health conditions and working hard for them. It means we're enhancing access and supporting the continued use of mobile cancer screening services for women in rural and remote areas. And it means we're increasing the number of Commonwealth-funded breast care nurses through the McGrath Foundation from 57 to 102. It means improving access to mental health services, subsidising telehealth consultations, and I know the member for Bass has been a real champion of rural mental health, having secured additional funding for the expansion of her local headspace in Launceston. More broadly, Mr Speaker, the government has many goals, including the goal to reduce stillbirths by 20% or more over the next 5 years. The rate is higher, unfortunately, in rural and regional Australia, and that followed a bipartisan Senate inquiry in 2018. And Senator Keneally, in the other place, played a strong role there. We also created the first national plan for endometriosis in 2018, championed by members on both sides, none more so than the member for Boothby. Brave in the face of a despicable campaign against her at the last election, and brave on behalf of all the women whose voices she has raised in this parliament. The health of rural and regional women and all Australian women remains a key focus of the Morrison government.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. A month ago, the Prime Minister told this House he asked his former Chief of Staff, Phil Gaetjens, to verify what his office knew about the reported sexual assault of Brittany Higgins only metres from where he works. Has Mr Gaetjens delivered his report and told the Prime Minister if he can trust his own staff? If not, when will it be received and when will it be released?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. No, I have not received that report, Mr Speaker, and I'll report further once I have received that report. And, Mr Speaker, as I've said in this place, and on my own inquiries on this matter, Mr Speaker, then no. No is the answer to the question in relation to what in terms of my office knew, Mr Speaker. I've set out very clearly when my office learnt about those matters. I inquired about those matters with my office, Mr Speaker, and we have gone through a process which we have done on other occasions with the Department Secretary, and when he has completed that report, Mr Speaker, he will provide it to me.
The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is backing women in STEM as part of our plan to increase participation and strengthen our economy for the future?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And the member for Lindsay and I launched the Girls in STEM toolkit in her electorate back in 2019, and that toolkit was actually so successful that in the last budget we actually committed more money to be able to expand that. And in fact, in the last budget, this government committed over $50 million for programs that were specifically designed to improve gender equity in STEM. We know that we have to decrease the gap between the number of male students and the number of female students that study STEM subjects when they're at school and go on to study STEM at higher levels and move into STEM careers. Mr Speaker, increasing participation in STEM is absolutely vital for the jobs of the future and also for our economy. So, a few years ago, it was estimated that if just one person in 100 shifted to a STEM role over the next 20 years, it would increase our nation's GDP by $57.4 billion. Now, we also know that STEM skills are vital for the jobs of the future, and that's probably even more so for those jobs that we're not even aware of at the moment, that are still to be developed into the future. Now, earlier today, Mr Speaker, I was at the Press Club along with the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and we listened to our new Chief Scientist, Dr Cathy Foley, address us as part of Science Meets Parliament. Now, Dr Foley herself is an extraordinary woman in STEM, and she had this to say about increasing the participation of women in STEM. Simply put, diversity of ideas and experience equals better results, and it's absolutely true. How can we look to solve the great challenges that we face or take advantage of the exciting opportunity in STEM if we're not embracing the skills, knowledge and perspectives of our entire population? If we're only drawing on half the talent pool, we are likely only to achieve half the results that we could. And that is behind our rationale in appointing the first Women in STEM Ambassador, Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith. And it's what drives her to make sure that we are getting young girls in particular more interested in studying science and maths at school and going on to undertake careers in STEM. It gives them the opportunity to secure a fulfilling job for the future. It boosts our economy. Quite frankly, it's a win-win for all.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
Over a year ago, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, delivered her Respect at Work report to the government. When will the government formally respond to all 55 recommendations?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Together with the many other responses the government has been putting in place on these matters, and I particularly refer to the implementation of the 4th Action Plan, which I can report is on track, Mr Speaker. 85% of measures meeting projected timelines and are dealing with the many issues. Now, Mr Speaker, I appreciate that I'm referring to a different program. I appreciate that I'm...
Members on my left.
If members opposite are not interested in programs which are interested in primary prevention to stop violence before it starts, to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and their children, to respect and listen and respond to the diverse lived experience and knowledge of women and their children. This is the 4th National Action Plan. Now, in the process of implementing the 4th National Action Plan, Mr Speaker, we are also moving through the Assistant Minister to the Attorney-General, Mr Speaker. She will be concluding her recommendations to the government on the response to that report, and we hope to be able to do that in the not-too-distant future. So, Mr Speaker, that is what the Assistant Minister is doing right now as we speak, Mr Speaker. There has already been a response in the budget of over $2 million in measures supporting the response to the Respect at Work program, Mr Speaker. But what I am pleased to say is that the 4th National Action Plan for protecting women against violence is on track, Mr Speaker. They're important projects, and work is already underway on the 5th National Action Plan, Mr Speaker. Some $1 billion has been invested by the government in implementing these measures that are designed to support women and be protected against violence wherever that may occur, Mr Speaker. $1 billion
Member for Sydney will cease interjecting.
And these programs, I note, because I note the interjections from those opposite, Mr Speaker. The 4th National Action Plan is a bipartisan initiative. It was supported by both sides of this House, Mr Speaker. That has been a key factor in its success since the first National Action Plan was put in place by Prime Minister Gillard, supported by the coalition in opposition at that time, and on coming to government we've invested a further $1 billion in the action plans that have followed. We are now working together, I hope, to put in place the 5th National Action Plan. And that's a National Action Plan, Mr Speaker, which is done together with the states and territories who are key
just say to the Prime
deliverers,
Minister,
Mr Speaker.
he's been... members can cease interjecting. He's been able to give some context, but it was a specific question about a response, very specific, and he'll need to come to that in his answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Well, I already came to it when I set out that the Assistant Minister to the Attorney-General is preparing that response and it will be released shortly, Mr Speaker. I addressed that in my early remarks, and I framed my response in the context of the more than $1 billion that the government has invested in protecting violence against women, Mr Speaker, which we will continue to pursue in a bipartisan way. We will continue to pursue those measures in a bipartisan way, and I would encourage the Leader of the Opposition to bring the Opposition to a bipartisan approach to this very serious issue.
The member for REID.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is working to keep women and children safe online?
The Minister for Communications has the call.
Well, I do thank the member for REID for this important question and acknowledge her deep expertise in this area as a clinical psychologist with strong interest in and knowledge about the issues of online safety and the impact it has on the safety of children and of women. Because, Mr Speaker, the sad fact is that too many Australians are subject to vicious online abuse, and we've had some high-profile instances over recent years. Erin Molan, Taylor Harris and, sadly, Dolly Everett and Charlotte Dawson, both of whom tragically took their own lives, with online abuse a significant triggering factor. Now, Mr Speaker, I've mentioned women there because the sad fact is that women suffer more abuse online than men. And our government has taken many steps to work to keep women and children, and all Australians, but women and children particularly, safe online. We established the Children's E-Safety Commissioner in 2015 and introduced a scheme to deal with the cyberbullying of children. We followed that in 2017, Mr Speaker, with a scheme to deal with the unauthorised sharing of intimate images. This is something which overwhelmingly affects women, and it is devastating. It is devastating for the victims when this occurs. Absolutely devastating, and we have introduced effective legislation to deal with it. And of course, Mr Speaker, we're now taking further action designed to keep Australians and particularly women safe online. We've committed more than $100 million over the next 3 years for the e-Safety Commissioner, and our new online safety bill expands her powers and includes a new scheme to deal with cyber abuse, serious cyber abuse directed at adults. Now, Mr Speaker, just today, the tech industry's peak body had an op-ed in the Sydney Morning Herald, essentially saying, in essence, oh, we need more time to get the details right. That's their commentary on our new legislation. Well, Mr Speaker, I'm sorry to say the tech sector has said this every time that we have sought to introduce new measures to keep Australians safe online. And I can say very clearly to the House, Mr Speaker, when it comes to a choice between keeping Australians, and overwhelmingly and particularly women and children, safe online and protecting the profits of big tech, the Morrison government will make one choice every time. We are determined to do what it takes to have the rule of law prevail online. We are determined to do what it takes to require that big tech does what is necessary to keep Australians safe online, and our e-Safety Commissioner, Julian McGrath, is leading that fight, and we are backing her all the way with more than $100 million in funding and strong new powers in our online safety bill.
The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the reports that the government will introduce legislation to allow domestic violence victims to take $10,000 out of their superannuation. Can the Prime Minister confirm that he's asking victims of domestic violence to fund their own escape plans, increasing their likelihood of retiring in poverty, but won't support 10 days paid domestic violence leave?
Members on my right, the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank the member for her question. The measure she refers to was part of the first Women's Economic Security Statement. There's been a second statement, Mr Speaker, in the most recent budget. The purpose of both of those statements was to provide as much security as we possibly can through the various measures that were put in place through both of those packages. Now, the measure which the member refers to, there is some draft legislation which has been issued, and we've been consulting with various groups around the country about their views about that. And they've raised strong concerns, Mr Speaker, about the nature of that measure. We're listening to those concerns, Mr Speaker, and that measure is now under review.
The member for Braddon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management.
The member has the call.
Will the Minister outline to the House what action the Morrison government is taking to help address agriculture's workforce needs and to assist the industry to reach its $100 billion target by 2030?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Speaker, I thank the member for Braddon for his question. The member for Braddon represents a very large and very powerful agricultural region in Tasmania, and he understands, like many regional MPs, the challenges, the increasing challenges on our agricultural workforce. And that's why, just under 16 months ago, the federal government launched John Azarias' committee into a workforce strategy to ensure that we understood the needs and the skills and the requirements of the agricultural sector to grow to $100 billion. And it's important to acknowledge and understand that not only does agriculture rely on skilled labour, but we also have a heavy reliance on a seasonal, and that has shown vulnerabilities, particularly through COVID-19. When we've seen the reliance on what was used to be the old backpackers, the working holiday makers. There was over 140,000 of them here before COVID-19. There are now under 40,000 of them here. And that's why the government has tried to work collaboratively with the states in making sure that we have solutions to meet those seasonal requirements in the here and now. And in August, we reopened the Pacific and seasonal worker programs, understanding that we could do that in a COVID-safe way. We opened up the opportunity for 25,000 pre-vetted men and women from 10 Pacific nations to come into this country and to work in agriculture because we identified agriculture as a critical industry. Unfortunately, there's only been 2,600 that have come into the country and we are working collaboratively with the states, encourage them to look for new ways to bring in these workers as they continue to want to maintain the quarantine protocols. And pleasingly, the Prime Minister took to National Cabinet only in the last couple of weeks a new initiative whereby the Chief Medical Officer put to National Cabinet to allow in-country quarantining for those citizens of Vanuatu and Fiji. This is a new initiative because of the work that we've done with our Pacific family, and I'm proud to say that the South Australian government has taken that initiative up, and we would encourage the other states in which to follow. But I also have to say and acknowledge the work the South Australian government has done only in the last couple of days in announcing a new hub, a quarantine hub for agricultural workers. They are working to bring in an additional 1,200 workers into South Australia in addition to their normal caps. And we say that this is an exemplar in which other states can follow.
Franklin.
The federal government stands ready to stamp the visas once the quarantine protocols from the states are agreed. They have the power. We have the ability to stamp the visa. We will continue to work with the states through the Azaris report in making sure we continue to build the skills, but also protect those workers that come into this country so that people can have an understanding of the opportunity in being part of an agricultural industry that will reach $100 billion.
And I call the member for Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said the Attorney-General would not perform certain functions of his office. If the Prime Minister intends to allow the Attorney-General to resume his duties without an independent inquiry, will the Attorney-General be responsible for the Sex Discrimination Act?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I refer the member to the response I gave to these matters yesterday, and I can advise the member that advice has been sought from the Solicitor General in relation to the scope of the AG's portfolio responsibilities in light of the defamation lawsuit, Mr Speaker, and once that advice is received, arrangements will be put in place that are consistent with it at the time of the AG's return.
The member for Longman will have the call when he gets to the microphone.
Thank
member
you,
for
Speaker.
Longman has the call.
Dodgy knee there. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer, Minister for Housing and Minister for Homelessness, Social and Community Housing. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's home builder plan is creating new jobs in the housing construction sector and generating housing confidence as we continue our comeback from the COVID-19 recession? And is the Minister aware of any alternative policy approaches?
The Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Housing.
Well, look, thank you very much. Can I thank the member for Longman for his question, and as all Queensland MPs in particular, but I think all MPs in this House understands just how successful the home builder program has been in igniting the residential construction industry throughout our country. Every major city, every regional centre and every small country town in Australia. In fact, in Queensland alone we nearly have 20,000 home builder projects, and nationally over 90,000 home builder projects, over 90,000, overwhelmingly being taken up by first home buyers who are purchasing that typical house and land package, people entering their home for the first time. And as the coalition government, we are the parties of first home buyers. Whether it's the home builder program, whether it's the first home loan deposit scheme, whether it's the first home super saver scheme. Now, Mr Speaker, I remind the House that this time last year the residential construction industry was going to hit a cliff. New home sales had virtually stopped overnight, and when we put Home Builder in place, we were hoping to protect the up to 1 million jobs in the residential construction industry. Never did we think that not only would the Home Builder program support those million jobs, but it would create new jobs. And by the end of last year, new home sales were up by 32.5%. 32.5%. And new home sales just means jobs for tradies on construction sites, whether we're talking about carpenters, plumbers, electricians, and the entire supply chain, which includes the manufacturing workers who make the bricks and the tiles and the glass, the timber mill workers who make the frames and the trusses. And, Mr Speaker, I'm asked by the member whether there are any alternative policies. Well, shamefully, the Labor Party opposed the home builder program. The Labor Party opposed the home builder program. In fact, the leader of the opposition in describing home builder, in talking about the first home buyers who have been using home builders to buy a new home, he said that all it would be good for is pearl taps and gold baths. Pearl taps and gold baths. This leader of the opposition is completely out of touch, and he's so out of touch he's not learned his lesson. They're still attacking home ownership. I saw reports in the AFR just a couple of weeks ago that Labor's housing taxes, to quote the AFR, are not dead. So the Labor Party does not want to support the residential construction industry, don't want to support first home buyers, and they've not learnt their lesson. The Coalition will always stand for the residential construction industry and new home buyers.
The Minister's time has concluded. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice.